6 days before the wedding. The dress was ready. The rings, the first dance, every tiny detail perfected. Her students couldn't wait to see her in white. But the only thing missing from the wedding day was the bride. What unfolded next would leave a community shattered and asking how this could ever happen. This is her story, one of love, loss, and the need for justice. Stay with us until the end of the video as we uncover this heartbreaking and haunting story together. The school grounds were silent, transformed into a memorial wrapped in grief. Yellow flowers, Stephanie's favorite, lined the walkway, and soft candlelight flickered beside handwritten notes. Some messages came from students, others were from strangers. But all shared one thing: the heartbreak of losing someone who had once made this town feel brighter. Even those who never met her felt the void. This wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a collective one. The night before, Stephanie's family and fiancé, Aaron, had stood among the tributes. They held each other quietly, surrounded by words they couldn't bring themselves to read aloud. It was supposed to be a time of celebration. Just days earlier, the town was buzzing with wedding talk. Stephanie had just come back from her bachelorette party. The honeymoon was booked, Tahiti. The dresses, flowers, first dance, even the bus to transport guests had all been arranged. She had planned every detail with her usual care and optimism. Leighton, a quiet rural town in New South Wales with just 10,000 residents, was where Stephanie Scott, 26, called home. Bright, caring, and endlessly cheerful, she was affectionately nicknamed Button Nose by her family. Her love story with fiancé Aaron began in childhood, growing from friendship into romance at his 21st birthday. Following in her father's footsteps, Stephanie became a devoted English and drama teacher at Leighton High School, where she was admired by both students and staff for her passion and warmth. The 11th of April, 2015, was set to be the happiest day of their lives, their wedding day. The final touches had been made. The bachelorette party was behind her, a Tahitian honeymoon booked, and even the first dance meticulously rehearsed. As the big day approached, Stephanie, ever the perfectionist, stayed behind while Aaron headed out of town for a gathering. She wanted to tie up a few final details, including preparing lesson plans to cover her absence during the honeymoon. That Sunday, the 5th of April, Easter morning, Stephanie arrived at the school around 11 a.m. to deliver her handover. She met a colleague to unlock the gate, then made her way to the English staff room. She emailed a bus company to confirm transport for wedding guests, then continued working for several more hours. Feeling accomplished and excited, she packed her things and locked up, finally ready to head home. It was supposed to be a simple, quiet day, but Stephanie never made it back. By early evening, Aaron had expected Stephanie to be home. She had mentioned she'd be gone for a few hours, just long enough to wrap up her final errands for the wedding. But as afternoon turned to evening, and there was still no word from her, something began to feel off. They had been texting the night before, and earlier that morning, with her replying promptly, as always. But from around mid-afternoon, the replies stopped. When he returned home around 7:20 p.m., the house was quiet. Her car wasn't in the driveway. Trying to stay calm, Aaron told himself she might have needed some space. After all, weddings came with pressure, and she was also preparing to be away from her students for a while. But silence was not like her. She had been enjoying every part of the wedding planning, beaming as she talked to her students about the dress, the food, and the flowers. Stephanie wasn't overwhelmed. She was excited and completely ready for the big day. That night, Aaron barely slept. He messaged her again early the next morning. Still no response. By 4:30 that afternoon, more than 24 hours since her last contact, Aaron reported her missing at the Leighton police station. Because Stephanie's car was also unaccounted for, police initially considered that she might have been in an accident, possibly veering off-road somewhere. They launched air searches with helicopters while officers on foot began combing through her last known location, Leighton High School. Due to the holiday, there had been few people on campus that day. That limited potential witnesses, but it also helped narrow the investigation. A check of the school's security system confirmed that Stephanie had disabled the classroom alarm at 1:31 p.m. and rearmed it at 1:38. After that, there were no more signs. Her phone had been turned off, and her social media and bank accounts had shown no activity since the 4th of April. By the 7th of April, missing person appeals flooded social media. One post alone was shared over 1,500 times. Local news picked up the story, and search parties began forming. But with her wedding just days away, and Stephanie still missing, hope began to quietly give way to dread. Her mother, Marilyn, said softly, "I think, if we don't find her today, you try not to think about it. But you do." As media gathered outside Leeton High School, tension hung in the air like a low fog. Reporters had returned, cameras rolling, not for a story of celebration, but for one steeped in dread. Police had been at the school for hours, and they weren't leaving anytime soon. They were now using digital mapping tools to survey the entire property, including the exact room where Stephanie was last seen. Investigators were building a visual reconstruction of her final known moments, step by step, meter by meter. A local resident who had been near the school on Easter Sunday came forward with a chilling detail. Around 2 p.m., she recalled hearing strange noises, something heavy being dragged or moved across the ground. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. She had also seen Stephanie's red car parked under a covered walkway. Later, it was gone. That small detail, once harmless, now carried weight that made her stomach turn. Inside the school, where whispers and worry had overtaken the usual rhythm of school life, another staff member described a deeply unsettling exchange. On Monday morning, as rumors swirled through every hallway, she asked one of the cleaners, Vincent Stanford, if he had seen Stephanie before she vanished. He said no. When she offhandedly asked whether Stephanie might have gotten cold feet before the wedding, Vincent let out an odd, nervous giggle. His face was scratched. The kind of scratches you don't get from carrying garbage bins. Vincent was 24, quiet, and largely invisible to most of the school community. When questioned by detectives, he claimed he had only dropped by to empty the bins, even though he wasn't scheduled. He said he left shortly afterward to do some grocery shopping. He offered no useful information, only a strange farewell. Good luck with the search. But his vehicle had been caught on surveillance driving away from the school that same afternoon. When police noticed a camera sitting on the front seat, they asked to take a look. Vincent shrugged and said, "Sure." What they found next made time stop. The first photos on the memory card were of a severely damaged scene in a remote wooded area. Vincent said they were from a film project, just something he thought was dark humor. The officers weren't amused. They knew exactly what they were seeing. It was Stephanie, and at that moment, Vincent Stanford was no longer just a school cleaner. He was the prime suspect in her disappearance, and what now looked to be a horrific, intentional act of violence. News broke late last night that left the entire town reeling. Vincent Stanford, 24 years old and employed as a cleaner at Leeton High School, had been arrested in connection with the disappearance of Stephanie Scott. For many who knew him in passing, the revelation was incomprehensible. But as the pieces began to fall into place, shock took over. Stephanie's red Mazda had been located, abandoned in a remote paddock more than 8 kilometers from the school. Her body, however, was still missing. People across New South Wales, teachers, students, parents, even complete strangers, were shaken. A teacher who had spent her days lifting others up had somehow crossed paths with someone concealing such disturbing intentions. If you had troubles, Stephanie was the kind of person you could talk to. One student said, "She made time for everyone. She understood." Her family, who had just traveled from overseas for a wedding, now faced the unimaginable task of planning a memorial. The shift from joy to sorrow was too cruel, too sudden to comprehend. Investigators soon uncovered troubling material on Vincent's phone and laptop, images of a highly inappropriate and illegal nature, involving minors, many appearing to have been taken from within the school itself. There were also covert photographs of women taken in public, indicating a clear pattern of invasive and obsessive behavior. A picture was forming, not just of a crime, but of a long-standing, hidden threat. Even though Stephanie's body hadn't yet been located, the evidence was overwhelming. On the 9th of April, Vincent Stanford was formally charged in connection with her death. The following day, another breakthrough emerged. A witness came forward, reporting that on Easter Sunday around 4 p.m., he had seen a man throw an object into a canal before driving away quickly. That object was recovered shortly after and confirmed to be Stephanie's missing laptop. Now, with a clearer search radius, police turned their focus to a stretch of land near where her car was found. Fields, vineyards, and waterways. Divers combed the canal. Search teams swept the terrain. And behind every camera crew stood a growing shrine. Flowers, handwritten letters, and photographs, left by people who still couldn't believe what had happened to the woman who had once lit up their classrooms. As the search intensified, police released a public appeal that marked a critical shift in the investigation. They asked anyone who had seen a white utility vehicle near Leeton High School on Easter Sunday to contact authorities immediately. That vehicle, linked to Vincent Stanford, was now at the center of their efforts. Every hour without answers weighed heavier on the town. But just as hope dimmed, a breakthrough came, one too painful to bear. Roughly 100 kilometers from where Stephanie was last seen, deep in the isolation of Cocopara National Park, search teams discovered what appeared to be human remains. The area was remote, quiet, and difficult to reach, surrounded by dry woodland and brush. The date was the 10th of April. Stephanie's wedding was meant to be the next day. Instead of preparing to walk down the aisle, her family now received the news they had feared most. There would be no miracle, only grief. The condition of the scene left no uncertainty. The remains matched the images previously found on Vincent's camera. The confirmation was devastating. What investigators had hoped were fabricated or unrelated photos were proven tragically real. She had been fatally harmed, her body left exposed in the wilderness, with signs of an effort to cover up what had happened. That truth had now surfaced. Shocking, undeniable, and irreversible. Back in custody, Vincent remained unaware that Stephanie's body had been found. Voluntarily, he asked to speak again with detectives. Calm and composed, he recounted what happened on Easter Sunday. He had seen Stephanie working upstairs at school. She was finishing lesson plans before her honeymoon. As she passed him, she offered a kind smile and a cheerful wish for the holiday. That small human interaction, innocent and trusting, was, according to Vincent, the moment he made a decision. He left the school, gathered items he had kept for reasons known only to him, then returned and waited. Stephanie, unaware of what was unfolding around her, was simply doing her job. What followed was not an act of impulse. It was a deliberate violation of trust, in a place that was meant to be safe. During his second interview with detectives, Vincent began to speak in chilling detail. His tone remained flat, his words measured, as if describing something far removed from himself. He explained that he had waited in the shadows of the school, watching Stephanie as she prepared to leave. She had finished her work in the staff room and was walking toward the exit when he approached her from behind. Without warning, he grabbed her, one arm across her middle, the other covering her mouth. He pulled her into a nearby storage room and closed the door behind them. Stephanie, realizing what was happening, struggled fiercely. She fought back, leaving scratches across his face and arms. Marks that officers had noticed from the very beginning, but now, finally, had a horrifying explanation. When asked directly what happened next, Vincent gave answers that were disturbingly clinical. He said he had brought a sharp-edged object with him and that he used it after forcing Stephanie to the ground. He claimed there was no argument, no confrontation. When officers pressed him on why he did it, his response was deeply unsettling. He didn't feel anger or revenge. He simply felt the need to act on thoughts he had harbored for a long time, thoughts about harming others, which until that day had never been acted upon. He admitted that Stephanie had never wronged him, never provoked him, and never even truly interacted with him beyond casual greetings. She had been kind. That was all. When asked again why he had chosen her, he offered no real explanation, only vague references to his mental state and an emptiness he claimed had followed him for years. His confession painted a picture not of rage or passion, but of cold detachment, of someone who had long imagined such violence and, for reasons still unclear, chose Stephanie as the one to make it real. In one of the most disturbing parts of his confession, Vincent described what he did after the incident at the school. After leaving Stephanie in the storage room, he said he drove home to make himself a sandwich and a coffee. That small detail, told so casually, added a level of emotional detachment that investigators found deeply unsettling. Once he finished eating, he returned to the school as if nothing had happened, entered through the same path, and proceeded to move Stephanie's body into the trunk of her own car. He then drove the vehicle to his family's home and parked it outside, staying there for a while and speaking with his mother and brother, who had no idea what had just occurred. This happened in the early hours of Easter Monday. In the quiet of the night, Vincent left again, this time heading toward a remote location he had chosen in advance. That location was Cocopara National Park, an isolated area known for its dense trees and difficult terrain. Once there, he removed the body from the car. When investigators asked whether this was done while still in the vehicle or on the ground, Vincent confirmed it happened outside, on the dirt. He acknowledged visible signs of physical trauma, referencing areas near the face and eye, and explained it as a result of force used earlier. Investigators asked him how he had attempted to conceal the scene. He said he had brought matches in a fuel container, and that he dropped a lit match directly onto the area. When asked if he stayed to observe, he said no, he left immediately, only glancing back once to confirm the fire had started. Photos later found on Vincent's camera confirmed the remains at the scene matched those captured in his possession. When asked why he had kept certain items of Stephanie's clothing, he said he didn't know, offering vague, conflicting reasons. He admitted to washing one item before disposing of it. Among the belongings taken were her earrings and both her engagement and graduation rings. He had mailed these, along with her driver's license, to his identical twin brother Marcus in Adelaide. Marcus, upon receiving the package, sold the rings at a jewelry store and destroyed the license. Though Vincent repeatedly denied any further actions beyond what he had already admitted, investigators were not convinced. Based on physical evidence and inconsistencies in his statements, he would later face additional charges related to the harm inflicted and the clear attempt to cover up the events. Vincent Stanford was born in Australia, but his childhood was far from stable. At the age of 3, his family moved to the Netherlands, where he spent several years before returning to New South Wales. From a young age, troubling signs had already begun to surface. According to statements he later gave to police, he started experiencing violent fantasies as early as 7 years old. By the age of 12, he had reportedly physically lashed out at a teacher, prompting serious concerns about his emotional state. At school, he was an outcast. Classmates gave him cruel nicknames, referencing his unpredictable and sometimes aggressive behavior. He struggled to maintain friendships, lacked basic social skills, and often defied authority. As his conduct worsened, Vincent was placed in what was referred to as a behavioral intervention school, a setting meant to help students with extreme emotional and disciplinary issues. But by his own admission, he never felt connected to those around him. He told investigators, "If emotions are something you're supposed to develop, I think I never did." His teenage years included admission to a psychiatric facility, where he was eventually diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and oppositional defiant disorder. After being released, Vincent attempted to pursue a more structured life. He applied to both the military and university programs, but was rejected by both. He drifted through a series of short-term jobs before landing a temporary contract as a cleaner at Leeton High School. Originally hired for 5 weeks, the contract was extended, and so, quietly and largely unnoticed, he entered the same school community that Stephanie Scott was so devoted to. But behind the scenes, disturbing patterns continued. He was reported to have spent time lingering in areas of the school where students should have been safe, particularly during lunch breaks. A closer inspection of his phone revealed a deeply unsettling trail. Investigators discovered that he had been secretly following and observing a 12-year-old student over a period of time. He had taken nearly 2,000 photos of her and kept handwritten notes tracking her schedule, when she left the house, who she was with, and when she was alone. In one of his entries, he chillingly noted, "Home alone, 15:40, enough time." Authorities now believe that his original focus may have been this young girl. When that plan failed to materialize, his attention turned elsewhere. And in the quiet halls of Leeton High School, he redirected that obsession toward Stephanie Scott, changing the course of countless lives forever. Forensic tests conducted inside Vincent Stanford's vehicle revealed significant evidence connecting him to the crime. Traces found on MDF boards in the car tested positive for Stephanie's DNA. Further searches inside the Stanford family home uncovered more disturbing proof. Additional DNA was located on various personal items, as well as parts of Stephanie's own vehicle. The details painted a grim picture, one that confirmed the extent of the violence inflicted and the premeditation involved. As Vincent continued giving increasingly unsettling interviews to investigators, the town of Leeton stood still. Businesses closed their doors. Classes at the high school were canceled. For one day, the entire community put aside its routines to gather for a public memorial and celebration of Stephanie's life. In a town that had become synonymous with grief, this was a moment of unity, love, and remembrance. 1,000 people stood together in yellow, her favorite color, creating a sea of brightness in the face of unimaginable sorrow. After a moment of silence, yellow balloons were released into the sky, drifting upward as if carrying Stephanie's spirit beyond the pain of what had happened. Her favorite song, Making Memories of Us, by Keith Urban, played softly through the crowd. It had been chosen for her first dance at the wedding. Now, it played as a farewell. Many wept openly, while others stood in quiet reflection, overwhelmed by both love and loss. Later, in the venue that had been chosen for the wedding reception, her funeral would take place. The space that was meant to host joy became a sanctuary for grief. But the emotional toll on the family was not yet over. Soon after the memorial, police made another arrest. This time, it was Vincent's identical twin brother, Marcus Stanford. He was taken into custody in the early morning hours at his home in the Adelaide Hills. Neighbors, stunned by the presence of police, watched as Marcus, wearing a casual sweatshirt, was escorted into a waiting vehicle. Authorities had gathered strong evidence that he had played a role in covering up aspects of the crime, particularly involving Stephanie's personal belongings. Though physically identical to his brother, Marcus now stood accused of something entirely different, helping to conceal the truth. At the Adelaide Hills flower farm where Marcus Stanford worked, his co-workers recalled that he mostly kept to himself. He rarely engaged in conversation and maintained a distant demeanor. So when police arrived one morning and escorted him out in handcuffs, many were taken completely by surprise. Was I shocked? Really shocked. One colleague said. Marcus, who did not have legal representation at his initial court appearance, seemed almost dismissive of the proceedings. When asked by the magistrate if he had any objection to being transported to Leeton, he simply responded, in a thick Dutch accent, that he had never been there and didn't see a reason to go back. Nonetheless, authorities arranged for him to be flown to Sydney in custody the very next day. While Marcus's involvement centered on attempts to dispose of evidence, the focus of the case remained on Vincent. Despite his disturbing confessions, Vincent initially chose not to enter a plea. However, the growing pile of evidence, including digital, forensic, and witness testimonies, left no doubt in the minds of prosecutors and the court. The case was deemed strong enough to proceed to a full criminal trial. Psychological evaluations conducted by experts painted a grim portrait of Vincent Stanford. They described him as detached, devoid of emotional capacity, and lacking remorse. He often chuckled when recounting details, showing no visible empathy for what he had done. Experts even labeled him as someone who fit the profile of a potential repeat offender, had he not been stopped. Fortunately, Stephanie's loved ones would not have to endure the trauma of a prolonged trial. In July 2016, news broke that Vincent Stanford had formally pleaded guilty to all charges related to the loss of Stephanie's life. He appeared in the Supreme Court of Sydney and admitted full responsibility. Meanwhile, his twin brother Marcus also faced the legal consequences of his involvement. He confessed to selling Stephanie's jewelry, destroying key personal documents, and helping his brother conceal elements of the crime. For this, Marcus was sentenced to 15 months in prison. The judge, citing the severity of the case, decided there would be no parole period. Without his early guilty plea, the sentence would have been longer. He was released in October 2016, but public reaction was swift and fierce. Nearly 60,000 people signed a petition demanding a harsher penalty, calling the sentence deeply inadequate. After his release, Marcus briefly returned to live with his mother in Leeton. However, the community, still mourning and reeling from the tragedy, made it clear he was not welcome. His current whereabouts remain unknown. Vincent Stanford appeared in court for sentencing just one day before what would have been Stephanie's 28th birthday. His voice when he spoke was quiet and measured. "I want to say I'm sorry for everything I've done," he said. "I understand the pain I've caused. I hope I don't cause any more trouble." He spoke of feeling regret and shame, acknowledging that nothing he said could undo the harm. Vincent vowed he had no desire to have contact with Marcus and expressed hope that he could eventually accept his fate. Outside the courtroom, their father Steve spoke for the first time. His voice trembled as he admitted he could not comprehend what his son had done. "I don't want to speak with him," he said. "I don't want to know why. Honestly, I don't want the answers." His pain echoed a community's heartbreak. A father torn between blood ties and the horror of an unthinkable act. Judge Martin then announced Vincent's sentence. For the crime of killing Stephanie Scott, he would serve life in prison, with no possibility of parole. For the other related charges, including causing her serious harm, he was given an additional 15-year term. These terms would begin retroactively from the 8th of April 2015, the day of the crime. The judge made it clear. This case fell into the most serious category of offenses, leaving no room for leniency. Holding back tears, Stephanie's mother, Marilyn, described her pain and strength. She spoke of her daughter as a light extinguished too soon. "He took something he had no right to," she said as her voice cracked. She explained that while they had decided not to speak further with the media, they remained committed to preserving Stephanie's memory. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we begin a new tradition. We'll have a cup of tea and a mint slice at 3 o'clock. Her favorite. It would have been her 28th birthday, the second we mark without her." It was a moment of quiet resolve. Even in grief, the family chose remembrance over anger. In the wake of their unimaginable loss, Stephanie's family took steps to ensure that no other family would have to endure the same pain. They advocated for more rigorous background checks and psychological assessments for all individuals working in public schools. Their efforts led to a private civil settlement with the New South Wales Department of Education. According to their legal representative, the purpose was never about compensation, but about change. They wanted to make sure that the kind of danger Stephanie unknowingly faced would never again be overlooked. But tragedy would visit the Scott family once more. Just over a year after Stephanie's passing, her father, Robert himself, a dedicated teacher, was killed in a sudden and heartbreaking accident. A tree fell on him while he was outdoors. He was laid to rest beside his beloved daughter, in the same place where so many had once gathered to honor her memory. As for Aaron, the grief became too heavy to carry in familiar places. He eventually moved to Europe, seeking some distance from the heartache that lingered across New South Wales. Years passed, and though life began to move forward, the absence remained. In time, Aaron found love again and became engaged, a quiet step toward healing. Stephanie's story continues to echo through her hometown and beyond. Her warmth, her laughter, and the vibrant energy she brought into every room still live on in the memories of those who knew her, and in the hearts of strangers who came to know her only after her passing. Schools, books, and candlelit vigils now carry fragments of her legacy. Yet even with the passage of time, the heartbreak never quite softens. It's the kind of loss that stays with you. The sudden end of a life, so full of promise, stolen in a moment that defies reason. The disbelief lingers. How could something so tragic befall someone so kind, so young, so loved? If Stephanie's story has touched you, let it guide how we move forward. Let it remind us to be vigilant in our care for others, to hold space for memory, and to speak up when change is needed, because honoring her doesn't end with remembering. It begins with what we choose to do next.